Tuesday. Let's see who's available to jump on. Let's see. Hi! Yay! We have people. Let's see. Getting set up still. Hi! Yay, thanks for jumping on. Awesome. Hi. Happy Tuesday. Perfect. Today we're talking about reflex integration. So this has been a hot topic, and a lot of people have been asking about this. Hey! So we are going to talk a little bit about it today. And we're going to go through kind of the basics of it. Hey, Caitlin. The basics of it, and then we'll talk about where you can get a lot more information, how I use it, and kind of my perspective of things. So we'll kind of go through the whole gamut of everything. What's up? Yay! Hi, everyone. Perfect. I always every time I watch an Instagram live, and I'm like one of the first people to hop on, and they're like, well, let's wait a little bit and see who else. I'm always like, come on, I'm here. So we're just going to get started. We're going to go right into it. So if you don't know, my name's Lauren Grabowski, LG the Fit OT, and I'm a pediatric occupational therapist for about 4 years now. So I currently work in outpatient, but I've been a traveling therapist, so I've kind of worked in almost every setting that is possible with peds, from schools to a little bit of early intervention and inpatient rehab. So kind of all across the spectrum, which has been an amazing learning opportunity. And now I am living in Florida. So I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and now I'm in Florida, loving the sunshine, and I get awkward tan lines, if you can see the diamonds on my chest. And other than OT, I also run health and wellness groups online. I'm a fitness instructor. I teach Pio Live, and I also teach at a university. So kind of all over the place. So we are going to jump right into it, and we are going to talk about reflex integration today. So if you know anything about reflex integration, it is it's a tight-knit community, I would say. So it is an amazing frame of reference, I guess, in theory, of a practice model that you can use, and that I fully have seen incredible benefits from. But there is a lot of training, and there is a lot of information that's kind of kept under wraps for rightly so too. So first and foremost, I am not certified in reflex integration. The MNRI, wait 1 second, I lost all of my things. So we'll kind of go through that. I'm not certified in reflex integration. I am not going to tell you pretty much, this isn't going to be a teaching of actual exercises. And so this is just my perspective of a practitioner who has one of the books that you can get for reflex integration. I've done a lot of research on it. I read a lot of articles, and I implement it within my practice the way that I know how I've been trained on it, and incorporating it with other capacities. So you can be a fully trained therapist. Parents can get trained. Any person can get trained in reflex integration and implement it. But I'm not fully, I'm not trained. I'm not a full reflex integration provider. But within OT, I feel like we definitely have there is an opportunity for us to utilize these exercises and just the frame of reference and all of the underlying information to see incredible results whenever it's coupled with functional activities. So we are going to, so there's a lot of different theories out, well, not theories, there's a couple different people that talk about reflex integration. The Muskatova, so Svetlana Muskatova, reflex integration, which is MNRI, is the biggest one that has a ton of research and underlying foundational work over the years. So that is the person and all of the reference that I believe that you should look at. So how to spell that? Svetlana is Svetlana. So that's her first name. And then Muskatova is Masgutova. Hi guys. Hey, thanks for jumping on. And then reflex integration. So MNRI is Svetlana has done a lot of research. I think she was working with war veterans at first. Oh, no, actually there was a big fire and a lot of children were severely burned, and she started working with them in the hospital, and that's where she started really seeing all of these reflexes and kind of getting into the work. So it's a really interesting backstory. So underlying all of this, reflexes, as you know, is an automatic response. So it's a motor response to sensory information. So there's some type of, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but I live in Florida right now. So reflexes, there are, it's an automatic response. So something happens in the environment or a sensory input is completed, and then there is an automatic motor response. So a lot of the primary or primitive reflexes that we've learned in school are present at birth and in utero and should be integrated or fully integrated by the age of 12 months. So those are the foundational reflexes that children use for protection, for survival, just for baseline motor development. And if those aren't fully integrated by the 12-month mark, whenever they should be, then then it can throw, it can really play a role in all of the other motor development, cognitive development, emotional and behavioral development that occurs after that. So if you think about a pyramid, reflex MNRI will talk about those reflexes being the lowest building blocks necessary to continue up the pyramid and to reach that higher intellectual, executive functioning kind of top piece, if that makes sense. So if those building blocks aren't in place correctly, then the whole pyramid is a little bit skewed. So that's whenever you'll see a lot of kids with autism and developmental disabilities and just overall behavioral or attention difficulties. A lot of those primary reflexes aren't appropriately integrated, which is kind of throwing off all of the system. Am I allowed to block people? I don't know how this works. I know on Facebook it's different. So if those building blocks aren't in place and set up correctly, then everything else kind of gets thrown off. So as we know in our science class, the brain has the ability to mold and shape and change pretty much always, but especially in those younger years, that neuroplasticity is a big, big factor in growth and development. So a lot of those kids, even if they come to us a little bit later, so like 5 or 6 or even up to 12, we can do these reflex integration exercises and see a lot of good changes. So that the good news is that there is a lot of research behind reflex integration that supports it if it's done correctly in an efficient manner. So that's kind of the basis of reflexes. The most common primary ones that you'll see is ATNR, STNR, the grasp reflex, tonic labyrinthine, what are some, or spinal galant, and then spinal pres. Those are the ones that you'll see a lot, especially if you see kiddos with autism. And yes, so yes, exactly. So this Muscatova Reflex Integration is a continuing education course. You can get certified on it. So there is, if you go to the muscatovamethod.com or .org, it has all of the list of continuing education courses. The one that they do recommend, there's a ton of them. There's like tactile sensitivity. There's a lot of different ones. Oh, okay. I might do that. And so there's a ton of different ones. I've been recommended that the first one that you should go to is the dynamic and postural reflex course. Now it is expensive and it is time consuming. I think it's 3 or 4 full days. And a lot of people say it's so much information that they need to repeat the course. So that's just kind of that's right there, proof of how in depth and so many layers and kind of challenging this can be. So what I did, I haven't been able to take the course yet because like I said, it is expensive and there's not a lot of courses around here. So I haven't been able to take that course, but I've been blessed to be around with a lot of good mentors that have been there, that are sharing information and kind of guiding how I'm using it in practice. So that's kind of why I gave this disclaimer at the front or at the beginning of the live. So there is a book though if you go onto that website, there's the textbook. It's the course manual that you can buy. So I bought this. This is, I think, like $75. It might be, I think it might be like $75. But it has been completely worth it and super beneficial. So I pull this out pretty much almost every single day. And the nice thing is that it goes through all of the different reflexes and separates it into kind of sections. And then the biggest thing that I think is super helpful is that at the end, they give you basically a chart, and it talks about all of the reflexes that are present or that are most common. Most commonly not integrated with like ADHD, chronic learning delay, dyslexia, lack of motivation, CP, autism, intellectual disability, Down syndrome. So it goes through all of those, and it's a really nice chart, just so something that you can see right away to test and see what's there, or see what's still present or persistent and not integrated. So that's kind of where I get my information. I really love the MNRI, all of the information, all of the research that they put out there. It's called the MNRI Dynamic and Postural Reflex Pattern Integration. So it's only, so we'll go over that. So it is the only book and the only big resource, I think, on the actual website. If you go to muscatovamethod.org, it is the only big course. So it's essentially the course manual to that big introductory class of dynamic and postural reflex pattern. So I will type it, MN. This video is about reflex integration. I am just typing out the pattern. So this is the course manual. So you have to get it on and then there's the website of where you can find it. So that is kind of where I get my baseline information. I do a lot of talking with other therapists and just seeing what they're seeing and sharing clients and everything like that. It is very intense. So whenever you are doing a pure reflex integration approach, they say it needs to happen 5 days a week, because essentially you're recreating neural pathways. So you're creating a different motor movement from the stimulation. So obviously practice in kind of making that pathway stronger is through repetition. So they'll teach you ways that you can teach the parent the exercises to continue it daily. But honestly, sometimes that's just not as functional for the family. You have to have a family that's fully invested. So as always, I'm just going to be very transparent with you guys, and there are people, and especially in the area that I am in, there's an OT that does amazing work and she's fully focused on reflex integration, and those parents are invested. It's all private pay, so they are doing those exercises every day. Whereas me, I kind of take a different approach, where I like to have a lot of tools in my tool belt, and I see the value in reflex integration. I've had incredible improvements with my kiddos, but sometimes I'm only doing it that 2 or 3 times a week that I'm seeing them, or with PT. I work really closely with a physical therapist that does amazing work as well, and we'll kind of share the caseload to hit those 2 or 3 times a week, which is good. So it is very intense, so you just have to be cognizant. So I use a lot of, especially in my practice, just clinical reasoning skills. I'm always just asking questions and reasoning through my approach. So like I said, I like to have a lot of tools in my tool belt, whether that be with sensory integration, motor planning, kind of just overall behavioral strategies, just being knowledgeable about a lot of different methods, and then putting them into build a therapy session. So for reflex integration, the biggest reflex exercises that you might see and that you might hear is the starfish, which is for Moro, and the robot or the lizard, that's for ATNR. So you can get the book, you can ask around other therapists, but you can also find some videos on YouTube. Just putting it out there. So if you even type in reflex integration into YouTube, sometimes that's a really good source just to start to get your hands wet, listen to people talk about it, and kind of start understanding it. I know I'm trying to be very diplomatic in the things that I'm saying. And so you can always look on YouTube. So this is kind of an example of how I would use it. Just me personally. We might do the starfish exercise the way that it is kind of taught through this course and online that I've seen. And then I might add another layer of functionality to put like a therapeutic activity involved. So maybe we're doing the starfish. Yes, exactly. That's a great resource. So we might be doing a starfish, and then next I'll transition them to a therapy ball, and we might be reaching backwards, grabbing objects, like extending back, pulling ourselves in, and reaching across to, hey Allie, to put things in buckets, or put a puzzle piece on, or put a little bit of like 2 things together. So that's kind of a way that I think about what motor movement we're activating and we're completing during the actual reflex integration exercise. And then I'll try to almost recreate that or do a variation of it during a functional task. So that's just kind of adding that extra layer of things, of advancements and difficulty, and tying it into kind of what we approach in everyday life of the importance of completing tasks and motor movements in those functional activities. So that's how I use it. Like I said, you can use it in so many different ways, but a lot of the things that I do is I like to take the core principles of reflex integration, core principles of sensory integration, of all of these different therapy practices and practice models, and then taking them and then putting them into functional practice, which is what all therapists do. But it just increases the difficulty, and it keeps me on my toes and more aware of the different modalities and the different frames of reference that we can use. So does that make sense how I use it? Is that helpful? Let's see. Hello, how do you get... Yeah, so actually that is just the number one question. If we could get if we could get kids to just do whatever we want without any problems, that would be amazing. But that behavioral piece is definitely huge. So I think perseverance and that motivation is key. And so one thing that I do think with reflex integration, so we'll start there. One thing I think with reflex integration is it's great. Sometimes if you just have a kid that'll lay there and let you manipulate him, but they're not supposed to have like the iPad or be watching videos while you're doing these exercises and facilitating these movements, and they have to really be able to follow directions. But a lot of kids on my caseload really can't. So I'm just taking it down a lot of notches and trying to just allow them to tolerate different positions just in general, so that we can work up to it. But whenever it comes to behavior and them not wanting to engage, so I always take it back to day one. I try to build my rapport with them. So I was thinking about doing a talk on like tips and strategies to therapeutic use of self in building, tips on building rapport. So let me know if you think that would be helpful. So from day one, whenever they walk into the clinic, I try to get them to want to be aware of what I'm doing and wanting to engage in what I'm actually completing. But as always, there are going to be times in kids where you actually just need them to do a task and they don't want to. So I'll either, so like what your coworker said was to continue the task. And don't chase them around. You can do that, like almost be ignoring the behaviors, especially if they're seeking that attention, and then just try to draw attention to what you're doing, making it super fun and like exuberant, and just making it like letting them kind of see that you're having a blast while you're completing that and trying to draw their attention. I do a lot of like motivating reinforcers. So whether I ask them if they're verbal and they can communicate what they want, I'll ask them what they want and then do the first then approach and see that might be helpful. If you are starting if you have a new kid, sometimes I'll let them lead the first couple sessions so they can pick whatever activity, and then it's my job to make that activity functional. So I might think we might start an activity and I'm like, oh, I really need them on their belly, or I really need them side lying, so we can maybe work on some reflex integration stuff, or we can start working on like bilateral hand coordination or proximal stability. So I'll let them pick whatever game, pick whatever activity, and then I'll manipulate that to get them them to do what I want. So that's a lot of how I do structure. It's kind of like almost like a floor time model, where they can pick whatever they want and then I'm going to manipulate it. So if you want to do that puzzle, that's perfectly fine, but we're going to do it my way. So that's kind of a way that I do it whenever they're kind of unmotivated and don't want to do it. Yeah, perfect. Charts is really helpful. Yeah, the nonverbal kiddos. Okay, yay. Yeah, so maybe I have a lot of topics. This is good. I'm glad that it would be helpful to kind of talk about it. And yeah, so exactly using their natural motivations and letting them control the session. It's hard. to balance between the two. And it absolutely can be. It is hard, but you'll get it, especially with practice and allowing yourself to develop those skills. So putting yourself in that situation over and over and over is going to allow you to develop those skills more quickly. More quickly. Oh, great question. So what differences do you see after using reflex integration during treatment? So honestly, one of the biggest things that I see is an increase in communication. So whether it be spontaneous words, being able to start communicating wants and desires, and I know technically that's more like speech, but usually, honestly, how many times, if you're a practitioner, how many times has a parent come in and been like, I just want my kid to talk, or I want them to be able to communicate better, and we're like, hey, we're in OT. But I think that especially because reflex integration, there's such a motor component, and there's so many systems that have to be working together in order to facilitate communication. I think that we do have a big role in it. So communication is number one, and the other biggest thing that I see is awareness. So just so much better awareness of surroundings, less scripting if they have autism and they're doing a lot of scripting, significant amount. A lot of kids are able to move through movements and positions a lot with just more fluidity and control and coordination, which is amazing. I do treat a kiddo that came in here and genuinely could not dissociate any part of his body. We would lay him on his back and we would turn his head like the slightest bit, and his eyes would be staying straight at the ceiling, trying to like figure it out. He had minimal ability to turn any aspect or dissociate any part of his body. And now he's like climbing up things and going on the zip line, and just a smooth movements, a lot more coordination, able to just facilitate a lot more appropriate awareness so that we can go into more appropriate play skills and those underlying issues. So those are kind of the biggest things that I see. So if I guess you probably won't be able to see. So Lisa, I do recommend the MNRI Dynamic and Postural Reflex Integration or Pattern Integration book. So you can get that on muskutovamethod.org, and how you spell that is MASGUTOVA method.org. So it's on there. It's actually the course manual to one of the dynamic and postural courses that you can take to get more information on that. So that is the one that I definitely use. Perfect. So goal-wise, okay, we'll get to that. So goal-wise, unfortunately, what I'm getting is I'm hearing that insurance does not, okay, so sorry, I'll repeat it one more quickly. Actually, if someone has it written down, can you type it in the comments like I did before? That would be super helpful. If not, I can get to it. So goal-wise, a lot of insurances, kind of like sensory, are being very stringent on the words reflex integration. So if you do see, if there's a reflex integration practitioner in your area that's only doing reflex, there's a 98% chance they're all going to be private pay, and it's all private pay. So there's no really big regulations, which is nice. So if you're doing, two of my clinics, I do work with insurances. So I have to be very careful about my phrasing and using the word reflex integration. So I do use the word reflex integration. Thank you so much. So that's the website you can get it at, or get all this information in the book and the courses and everything. So so you have to be really careful about the phrasing. So I do say reflex integration, but one of my sentences usually look like this. So it'll say, therapist facilitated functional reflex integration exercises to increase processing, awareness, and coordination in preparation for functional tasks. So that's kind of what my sentence will look like. So functional reflex integration, and then in preparation for functional tasks. So that's what my sentence will look like. If I don't use the word reflex integration, I'll usually describe it as a functional motor or functional gross motor, vestibular, ocular motor exercises. So I'll kind of just throw all those words in rather than saying a pure reflex integration. It's kind of like whenever you don't want to say the word iPad, you're like, you utilized a finger or completed a finger isolation visual motor integration or activity. So it's kind of just using choice words to get around the actual topic. So that's what I'll do whenever I'm typing my notes, because I have heard that insurances don't either pay for it or agree with it, or, they're always like last on the train. So I'm pretty sure one day they'll get back on or get on it. But until that day, you do have to be worried or careful about your phrasing. And then I had a kid who never Yeah, so actually, vestibular input is very closely associated with communication and vocalizations. So one of the first things that anytime I'm talking to a speech therapist and they're like, oh, they talk so much in your session, like, what are you doing? I'll say, put them on a swing or get them moving, because the more movement and the more that you activate the vestibular system, it increases. It's most closely associated with the tactile sensory system and communication. So if you have a super tactile defensive kid, usually I'll do a lot of prep, either with vestibular input and kind of coordinate all of that. And then usually their communication tends to increase too. Super interesting. Vestibular input is just awesome. Love it. So perfect. So that's kind of all the information that I have. Like I said, I'm not a certified practitioner. I just utilize it as a tool in my tool belt, and I think it's super, I think it has been super amazing, and I see a lot of incredible results. But I have had multiple parents come to me and specifically ask for reflex integration. So it is a very up and coming and popular method in practice. So I do recommend trying to get up on the information and see what you can learn and start utilizing it in your practice, just playing around with it and seeing what you can see, because it is a really interesting frame of reference. As for there was a question about testing. I don't know if you're still on here, but for CODAs and for the MBCOT, I don't know if there's a lot on there. Next semester, I am teaching the pediatric course at the university, so I'll be curious to see, but I think you touch on it briefly, but I really don't think it goes into depth. Like I said, because it takes a lot of continuing education and a lot of information and research. Yeah, so it can. So if this is a little bit off topic, but vestibular input can last up to 4 hours. So that's kind of why if you're going on a roller coaster and all day, the rest of the day, you're feeling a little off, that vestibular input can stay impactful to a sensory system for up to 4 hours. So it can definitely carry over. I don't know. So getting a kid to eat in school or drink from a cup versus a bottle, I would kind of go through, I wonder, do they have a lot of behavioral or like defensiveness? A lot of there's different exercises for Moro, for fear paralysis. So kind of just always being in that fight or flight method, which is a lot of kids with autism, that they're always just on guard. So there's a fear paralysis. There's a fear paralysis exercise reflex that you can go through. That's really interesting. I would be curious if it was more like behavioral rather than a pure reflex or motor difficulty, especially since he's eating at home. Questions that I would follow up just as a practitioner, if that was my kiddo, I would see what food that he's eating at home to see if it's different than the food that he's being served at school, and the environment. So if you could see him in the school environment, I wonder if it's like super noisy and just maybe overstimulating. You could actually also think maybe about the time of day. If he's super fatigued, didn't say he's this low tone kid, and if they're eating at 1 p.m. and they still haven't had their nap, he might just be genuinely exhausted, that he just is having a hard time. He'll touch and pick it up. Okay. So like food wise. So recommend any book or courses that go into deeper on sensory integration. I feel like I'm still struggling with that too, just because I think sensory integration, just like reflex integration, is a very tight-knit community, and they're very, very protective of the information that they kind of throw out there. And it is a little bit disappointing because sensory integration is, there's a lot of coursework and it's almost like a second degree. So it's a lot of time and financial investment. So it's hard. I think other things that incorporate a lot of sensory is Brain Gym is a really good one, and astronaut training. So astronaut training and Brain Gym are really good, and that's a lot of like ocular motor and vestibular, and a lot of that can carry over to kind of get into the tactile systems and different things like that. So look into those too. Those are really good ones. Yeah, so maybe we, so yeah, maybe it could definitely be a little bit of more of that sensory defensiveness, and yeah, Brain Gym's awesome. And so let me think. Sometimes a lot of that, I have a kid that I feel like might be very, very similar, where he's just, before he wouldn't do any messy play. Now I can get him to the point where he'll play with it and he'll kiss it and do everything, but it's the eating part, the actual eating part, that's becoming really difficult. And I do believe, usually I don't really jump to this, but I do think it is kind of more behavioral. I also would be very cognizant of the food that they are having. So find those preferred foods, just kind of like an SOS approach. Find those preferred foods, but also maybe recommend getting some like food sensitivities, or asking the parents food allergies, just to see if there's anything that's abnormal. Because I always think if they're allergic to something, or if something's not sitting right with them, they have some type of sensitivity, then I wouldn't want to eat either. So funny story, not funny, but I have celiac disease, so I'm gluten-free. And my whole life, I refused to basically eat pasta. If I ate a hamburger or hot dog, I didn't want the bun. I hated all of that. And I think it was because internally my body was like, no. But there were times where my parents would be like, eat your dinner. And I just think back, in years and years of damage that I've done has been, no offense to my parents, they're fantastic. But just because you don't know and you don't really realize, but my body was saying, no, stay away from that. But external forces were like, no, you have to eat. So I would kind of look into that too, just as a different perspective. But you can send me a message and we can even chat more and see if we can think of more things to try out that might be beneficial. So perfect. Does anyone else have any other questions or thoughts? See, it's crazy. And a lot of people that have celiac disease are like a little with sensitivities of, oh, if you don't have celiac disease, then you shouldn't, like, whatever. But I think with gluten, every person sensitive to it and probably should decrease it a little bit. So those are just personal thoughts, though. It's crazy. Yay! I'm glad you love them. I love doing them. So I hope they're helpful. But so this replay, if you didn't catch up in the beginning, this replay will be on online on YouTube. I'll put it on my YouTube channel, so make sure you check it out if you need the replay, or the replay on Instagram will be live for the next 24 hours. Yay. I kept getting notifications. Did you see? I was like, swipe. Yay. So let's go Pens. Huge hockey fan. So that's amazing. Yay. Awesome. So I will see you guys next Tuesday. I'll probably do a poll this week of either talking about building rapport or evaluations and kind of basics of how I organize my evaluations. So make sure you keep an eye out for that and vote for what you want to talk about next Tuesday. So have a great night, everyone.